A machine that weighs less than a pickup truck just put a fresh hole in the side of a warship 40,000 tons heavier than itself. That's the headline detail from this year's RIMPAC exercise off Hawaii, according to reporting from Military Times and the outlet Autonoción.com. The attacker was an uncrewed surface vessel called GARC, weighing roughly 4,800 pounds. The target was a decommissioned warship displacing about 40,000 tons, already scarred from missile strikes earlier in the same drill. Do the math and you get a mass mismatch of roughly 16,000 to 1. A tiny robot boat went after a target 16,000 times its own weight and, by the accounts of this test, landed a hit. This video isn't about a Hollywood explosion. It's about why the U.S. Navy is spending real exercise time and real ammunition proving that small, uncrewed boats can put shots on something the size of a former U.S. warship. We'll walk through what GARC actually is, what RIMPAC is, and why it works as a testing ground, what's confirmed about this specific strike versus what comes only from secondhand exercise reporting, and why Navy leadership keeps talking about small, autonomous surface craft as a serious piece of future naval warfare instead of a gadget demo. Let's start with the exercise itself, because the setting matters as much as the boat. RIMPAC, the Rim of the Pacific exercise, is the largest international maritime warfare exercise in the world. The U.S. Navy hosts it out of Hawaii on a biennial cycle, meaning every 2 years, and it draws in dozens of participating and observing nations at a time. Ships, aircraft, submarines, and now increasingly uncrewed systems from multiple navies operate together off the Hawaiian Islands for several weeks. It's the place where navies test doctrine and hardware they aren't ready to try in a live conflict. One recurring feature of RIMPAC in recent cycles has been the SINKEX, short for sinking exercise. A retired U.S. Navy vessel, already stripped of anything hazardous and taken fully out of service, gets towed to a designated area and used as a live target. Multiple ships, aircraft, and now uncrewed platforms from different participating nations take turns firing on it with real weapons, in sequence, over a day or more. It's not a simulation. The steel gets hit. According to the reporting on this year's exercise, the vessel used as the RIMPAC target had already absorbed missile fire from other participants before the GARC test boat took its turn, meaning the reported waterline hit from the drone boat landed on top of existing battle damage, not on a pristine hull. That detail matters for how you read the outcome. A 40,000-ton hull that's already been hit by missiles is a different animal than an intact warship. We'll come back to that. So what is GARC? Here's what's genuinely established, kept separate from anything speculative. GARC is a small, uncrewed surface vessel, a boat with no crew aboard, operated remotely or with a degree of autonomy, built small enough that its total weight is measured in thousands of pounds rather than thousands of tons. This year's test was described as the first live-fire training test of this specific craft, meaning the first time it was used in an exercise setting to actually fire on or strike a target, rather than just demonstrate navigation, surveillance, or communications relay, which is what most uncrewed surface vessel testing has focused on up to now. That distinction is worth pausing on. Most of the Navy's public uncrewed surface vessel work over the past several years, programs like the Ghost Fleet Overlord medium and large uncrewed surface vessels, and the smaller craft trialed by outfits like Task Force 59 in the Middle East, has centered on sensing, surveillance, and logistics rather than offensive strike. A small craft actually being used to hit a target ship is a different category of test, and it's the reason this particular RIMPAC event drew outside reporting attention at all. Here's the part that doesn't sit neatly with the old picture of naval warfare. For most of the last century, a Navy's entire logic was built around the warship as the unit of power. Bigger hull, bigger guns, bigger crew, bigger budget. A 40,000-ton vessel is a colossal capital investment: steel, propulsion, weapon systems, and, when crewed, hundreds of sailors aboard. Small uncrewed attack boats like GARC flip that logic. Instead of one extremely expensive, heavily defended platform, you field large numbers of cheap, expendable ones and accept that losing a few is a fair trade if a several $1,000s boat can meaningfully hurt a target that costs orders of magnitude more to build and operate. Dig into how these small craft programs get discussed in Navy and defense industry circles, and one thing stands out. Nobody is arguing a boat like GARC would sink a warship on its own. The argument is about attrition and saturation. The idea that even a partial hit, repeated across many small, hard-to-target boats attacking at once, forces a warship's crew to burn defensive resources, sensors, and time on threats that look trivial individually but aren't trivial together. A single 4,800-pound boat hitting a 40,000-ton hull doesn't sink it. A swarm of them arriving from different bearings at once is the scenario the Navy is actually trying to build toward. Now the honest caveat, because this is where coverage of military exercises quietly slides from fact into assumption. What's confirmed, per the cited reporting, a GARC craft was fired in a live fire test at RIMPAC this year. The target was a decommissioned warship of roughly 40,000 tons that had already sustained missile damage in the same exercise, and the drone boat added a hit at the waterline. What isn't an independently verified Navy damage assessment is the full extent of that new damage, the exact identity of the target hull, or precise figures on the strike beyond what Military Times and Autonocyon.com have relayed. The Navy periodically releases limited details about SINKEX participants and outcomes, and it doesn't always confirm every reported figure from a training cycle in a formal statement. Treat the tonnage, the weight, and the sequence of events as reported facts from those outlets, not as a line from an official Navy damage report. So here's the real question. Is a 5,000-pound boat denting a 40,000-ton hull a meaningful proof of concept, or is it closer to theater, an exercise photo op dressed up as a breakthrough? That's worth sitting with, because the answer shapes how seriously you take the next few years of Navy budget requests built around small, autonomous craft. Here's an unpopular take, and it's ours to own. On the numbers alone, a single waterline hit on an already damaged hulk proves less than the framing suggests. A 40,000-ton former warship that's already absorbed missile fire isn't a fair stand-in for an intact, defended vessel with its own countermeasures, point defense weapons, and a crew actively working to save the ship. If GARC or a craft like it had to close on a live, undamaged target with active defenses and still scored a hit, that would be a far stronger demonstration than adding a mark to a hull already being sunk by other means the same day. None of that erases the value of the test. First live fire runs are modest by definition, but the 16,000-to-1 framing makes for a better headline than a combat conclusion, and it's fair to say so. What this test does establish, more credibly, is engineering and procedural proof. A craft this small can be integrated into a live fire exercise, aimed and fired with enough control to actually connect with a target at sea, and it can do that without putting a crew's lives at risk. That's a genuine step, even if the tactical significance of one hit on a battered target hull is limited. Would you trust a fleet of small, autonomous boats to meaningfully threaten a full-size warship? Or does this look more like an early-stage demonstration dressed up for headlines? Drop your take in the comments. People who follow naval programs closely land on both sides of it. It's also worth being honest about what a program like this still has to prove before anyone calls it operational. Small, uncrewed surface vessels face real, unglamorous problems. Communications links that can be jammed or spoofed at range, sea state limits that keep smaller hulls in harbor during rough weather when larger warships can still operate, and the basic question of how a craft this size carries enough munitions or explosive payload to do serious damage without just becoming a very expensive, very slow torpedo substitute. One RIMPAC test solves none of that. It's why the Navy runs incremental live fire tests like this instead of jumping straight to fielding a fleet of them. Where does this actually leave the program? Per the reporting on this year's RIMPAC, GARC's live fire test is being treated as an early, first-of-its-kind demonstration rather than a finished capability. The Navy has said, in general terms, that it wants more autonomous and uncrewed platforms across its surface fleet, and that push shows up in budget documents, in officials' public remarks about distributed maritime operations, and in the broader Ghost Fleet Overlord and Task Force-style experimentation running across multiple fleets over the past several years. This specific test fits inside that larger, well-documented trend. What it doesn't do, based on what's publicly available, is confirm that GARC or craft like it are moving toward near-term fielding on any specific timeline. Whether or when a program like this leaves the test phase isn't part of the current public record around this exercise. So, open questions worth tracking if you follow this story further. Will the Navy release a formal damage assessment on the target hull beyond what's been reported by outlet accounts of the exercise? Is GARC a one-off RIMPAC demonstrator, or does it fold into an existing program of record with a production timeline? And how does this test compare with what other navies, allied participants at RIMPAC included, are doing with their own small uncrewed attack craft in the same exercise cycle? The current reporting doesn't answer any of that, and it would be dishonest to guess here. What we can say with confidence: this year's RIMPAC produced the first reported live fire strike test of the GARC uncrewed surface vessel, a roughly 4,800-pound craft, against a decommissioned warship of about 40,000 tons that had already taken missile damage earlier in the same drill. The mass mismatch is real, and it's dramatic. Whether it's a genuine inflection point in naval warfare or one useful data point in a much longer testing program will only get answered by the tests that come after this one, and by whether the Navy is willing to run this same experiment against a target that isn't already half sunk. If you want to verify any of this yourself, the sourcing trail is short and it's linked in the description. Go read it directly rather than taking any single video's word for it, ours included.